everyone, and welcome to Permission to Heal. I am Marcy Brockman, and I am thrilled that you are here. Today, we have part one of a special two-part episode. Emily Ragland is here with us this week and next week. Emily is a dynamo. She is an active board member of the Family Life Coaching Association and is currently a behavior support specialist at a charter school in the Triangle of North Carolina. She is a graduate of North Carolina State University's Youth, Family, and Community Science graduate program, where she earned her master's in research, as well as a graduate certificate in family life education and coaching, summa cum laude. With experience serving and supporting families of individuals diagnosed with developmental delays, autism spectrum disorder, challenging behaviors, social struggles, and other developmental challenges, Emily looks forward to expanding her work in the field of family science. Emily obtained her bachelor's degree in philosophy with a minor in African American studies at Guilford College in Greensboro, and is enthusiastic and eager to make productive use of her education as well as her work experience to strengthen families. Emily has dedicated her professional work service thus far to children who struggle with learning and social engagement, emotional awareness, and behavior, as well as their family. She is a strong advocate for informing training for parents and professionals who are working with children, believes that training around behavior management, supporting parents, supporting professionals who are engaged with children, and looking at trauma as she is committed to trauma-informed training for parents and professionals, training around behavioral management, parental support, professional engagement with children with special needs, to allow families and children to feel heard, supported, and skilled in handling the challenges that life throws at us. She opened her own LLC, Family Life Education, the same month she graduated, and has worked in the school system since, working one-to-one with parents, training professionals, and building her business and helping individuals. So Emily and I started this conversation on a Monday morning and kind of very quickly forgot that we were recording a podcast. It was just so engaged and so interesting and covered so many topics. We started talking about trauma-informed parenting and teaching our kids emotional literacy and how that extends into education, and then the trauma that students are growing up with, that kids are growing up with, from gun safety drills and school shootings to Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ plus and so on. And we were talking about emotional literacy and how all of that is the parents' responsibility to teach their kids how to be resilient and how to have strategies and how to understand who they are and where they came from and what all of their emotions mean and so on. And then the conversation morphed into education and trauma-informed educators and the emotional fallout of COVID and how we're going to handle that come September. And so that's going to be part two that you'll hear next week. So you'll bear with us because it wasn't planned that this was going to be a two-parter, but I think it's fair to you listeners to separate it out because otherwise it's a very, very long episode. So stay tuned for part one of Marcy Brockman and Emily Ragland talking about trauma-informed parenting and emotional literacy. Oh, my younger daughter was like crying all the time, and I was like trying to figure out how to cope. And she was like 3 years old, and she looked at me and she goes, "Well, you wanted that baby." I'm like, "Yep. You're right.
And
I still do. I still do. But,
I remind myself of that every morning. I wanted this. This was my plan.
This was the plan all along. And now she's my best friend. So
love it.
It's out great. So Emily, you are a family life coach, a parenting coach, all sorts of amazing stuff. Tell us a little who you are.
Yeah, so I work with families and professionals that work with children and families. And my goal is to focus on having a trauma informed experience. So, always being aware of the way that the world has impacted our children and family from a trauma standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
and being conscious of how that impacts academics, ability to socialize, ability to handle behavior and emotional regulation, and then as parents, how we perhaps bring our own trauma to parenting and how that can impede sometimes on our ability to be successful parents. So my background is largely in individuals with special needs, but my education has been also around youth, family, and community sciences. So the overall perspective of just how our societal norms, as well as our policies, our laws, our procedures as a country, impacting families, and how and what can we do perhaps to be more family focused and less individual focused.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I know for myself, looking at the way my parents parented me from a kid standpoint, there were a lot of things that I felt were mishandled, were
Yes.
lacking, were not done the way I needed to do, the way I would have needed, that caused a lot of trauma and angst and unhealthy behavioral
Right.
patterns and emotional relationship templates and all of that in me.
Absolutely.
And so I've been in therapy forever. Which I could never live without. I've been writing in journals for close to 40 years.
Right.
It's weird to be able to say that,
Think
but
about that. Right.
right. And it wasn't until recently that I started thinking about trauma as intergenerational.
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
when I go back to my great grandparents who fled Tsarist Russia,
Right.
escaping pogroms, and came to the United States looking for a better life and never spoke to their families in the old country again, and how they then raised my grandparents who grew up with, in poverty in
Right.
Brooklyn and faced the Depression and all of that, and being Jews in New York and what that was like, and then giving birth both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, seeing what their childhoods were like in the 40s while
Right.
the United States and the whole world was in a world
Right.
war, and the old world sensibility of stoicism and just, sucking it up and
Right.
whatever else.
Absolutely.
Like I could
Behind closed
see,
doors, and
right, I
this is
can
a
see
family conversation. And
Right. I can see how all of that contributed to my parents being who they were and my mother's illness as a young child, and then I can see how they were as humans
right.
and totally ill-equipped for their own adulthood, let alone parenthood.
Right.
And then
Exactly.
I can put into perspective what my experience was.
Yes. And I think that's a challenge, I think, to sit back and not only process all of that, but also accept that it's out of our control at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and how and what can we do moving forward to not recreate that same generational re-traumatization. And I think oftentimes it comes relatively naturally to, of course, have your kids around their grandparents. And so then does that trauma then go on to your child? And so us being aware of how life has impacted individuals and those in our family especially, and just the world and how it's impacted people. I think
Yeah.
often when we think trauma, we think an experience individually. We think of a car accident, we think of a house fire, we think of an assault. And of course,
Those are
those
the
are
things
all
you
very
could
traumatic.
see. And they're
Right.
easier to address and easier to
Exactly.
point at
Point your
because they're
finger.
visible.
That's what it was.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Emotional trauma is long term and
Absolutely.
impossible, not impossible, but much more difficult to describe because
Right.
it makes you feel like you're crazy inside
Yes.
your head because
Yes.
it's
Because you
not
can't
visible.
explain it. And that's,
Right.
I think then that also feeds into the challenge of mental illness and mental health is, again, the conversation of if I can't see it, then nothing's wrong with me. Or if they can't see it, then nothing's wrong with me. And so when you say to people, I'm struggling or I'm depressed or I'm feeling anxious or I don't know what I'm feeling, but it's not a good feeling, then people say, well, you look fine. And so, or, you know, well, you cover it well, or you still do well, so it doesn't seem to bother you. And so those things on top of the inability to point a finger and say, this is what happened and when I was triggered, that makes it increasingly more difficult to see how we can do something about it.
Exactly. And it's really the opposite of what those of us who struggle with a variety of mental illnesses need, you know.
Right.
Even if you're not going to be actively compassionate or help me through it, at least just don't be disrespectful, you know?
Absolutely. It's re-traumatizing. It's to sit there and say, if I can't see your trauma, if I can't see your quote brokenness, it's not real.
Right.
And so then, like you said, it makes you question in your head, like, am I blowing something out of proportion? Is something wrong with me? Would other people not be bothered if that happened to them? You know, or if your family perhaps is part of the trauma, them saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal. You know, we were fine. You were fine. I saw you grow up and it wasn't that bad. It just makes you think like you have something wrong with you. And when you grow up with that perspective, you're convinced that you do. And no matter what happens in your life, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting for the next big trauma. You're waiting for the next challenge. And then you live in fight or flight or freeze. And once you're in those things for an extended amount of time, decisions aren't being made. Your body and your brain are just reacting. And that's when we talk about having a hard time handling stress and trauma is there's no time to think because your body's just trying to stay alive.
You just described my childhood.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a shame. And I think the hardest part is as a nation, we don't acknowledge it.
No.
And we don't put a word to it. And we don't say, I'm sorry it happened. And we don't say, what can we do so it doesn't keep happening? Right. We just sort of accept that that's how life is. And that's when we accept it is when we ignore it, I think. You know, we can't just
keep complicit.
Right, exactly. We can't just keep saying, oh, well, you know, life's hard sometimes. Or, you know, when I was a kid, life's not fair. It's like, well, life doesn't have to be fair. I'm not asking for it to be fair. I'm asking for it to make sense. I'm asking for it to not hurt me. Right. I'm asking for it to be acknowledging when it does hurt me. And I'm asking for someone to help me through it.
Exactly. And that was my goal, really. You know, when my mom got to her most belligerent, unreasonable, self-medicated, drug-addicted self, she said and did a whole lot of things to hurt me that I could never unhear.
Right.
But I probably would have accepted it forever because I felt like I was her only daughter and who else does she have but me? And, you know, my stepfather was a bit enabling and he had his own pathology. And then she turned the tables and attacked my kids verbally. And stood in my living room and screamed such horror at them that they got scared to death. I mean, they were like 8 and 11 or something.
Oh my gracious.
And they ran out of the room, ran into my daughter's room, locked the door, and were crying, huddled together on their bed. And as quick as a light switch, people who are listening to this podcast have heard me tell this story a few times now at this point. Probably should get some new stories. This is my life, so
I was gonna say they're told because they're important and they're real,
right? But as quick as a light switch would go on, I turned from the ever victimized, abused, obedient daughter
Right.
to the powerful lioness protecting her cub and her
Amen.
den,
Yes.
and threw my mother and my stepfather out of the house and never spoke to them again.
You have to. And good for you. And I think that's where we fall into, like you said, we fall into these family roles.
Right.
And often we stay in them until something significant pushes us out of them.
Right.
And rarely is it significant enough in the sense that like we acknowledge it and see it. It's usually something horribly traumatic that pushes us to that point where we say, you know what? I can't survive this further. Like it's not just I don't want to. I know for a fact my mental health, my mental safety cannot continue being abused or being disrespected or being re-traumatized.
Right.
And then you have to say,
all of that happened prior to my mother attacking the kids.
Right.
So I had already felt that. I had the anxiety and asthma attack thing, and she was still screaming, and then she attacked the kids, and I was like, we are done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think part of it too, as a survivor of trauma as a child, when we get older and we're able to sort of have our voice again, we find it, and we find it so much stronger because there's part of us, I think, that sort of speaks up for the little kid that didn't get to speak up.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And so we come off strong and firm and hard, and we say, you know what? I know that you're surprised that I'm pushing back. I know that you're surprised that I'm saying I'm not going to take it anymore. I know that this is changing the roles, but without the roles changing, I'll be re-traumatized for who knows how long. And you just have to change them. And sometimes that means losing family. Sometimes that means losing friends, having to move, changing careers, changing jobs.
Yeah.
But for your mental health and mental safety, I think those are things that we have to prioritize.
Absolutely. And I lost, you know, my mother's entire immediate family that she had married into, my stepdad and my nephews and my step siblings, and I lost all of them because they were still in her power. So
yes.
And she didn't give them permission to speak to me, so they didn't.
Gosh.
Which is ridiculous. And then after she died, they were like, oh, good, now we can have you back again. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so.
That's not how it works.
That's not how it works. Exactly.
Right. And you think about one of the things you just said, you know, when you think about an abuser, one of their biggest powers is isolation. And, you know, we often think, again, that an abuser is someone who's physically hitting us or a spouse that's hurting us physically. But an abuser can be a parent or someone who's passively not stepping in and addressing, you know, your traumas that should be protecting you. That's an abuser. And so, you know, us being able to say, you're not going to keep me from humanity. You're not going to keep me locked up in this house. I'm not going to be a behind closed door trauma, you know, victim. I'm going to go out into the world and be a trauma survivor. I'm going to speak on it. I'm going to own it. I'm going to rebuild from it. And hopefully in the process, help some people through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was no other way around that for me. And now that I've gone through it and I know my kids are good and, you know, my daughter's in therapy and she inherited my mother's bipolarity, but we caught it really early when she was like 18, 19 years old. So she knows how to handle it and how to manage it and she's the one who self-diagnosed. I mean, she is the most self-aware
I'll say that's powerful
human being that I have ever known. And she inherited my love of journaling. And she started to see patterns in her own behavior while she was away at college and how she was dealing with or reacting to roommates and dorm mates and friends that she was meeting and what her moods were like. And she realized that there was such a high and then such a low, and that she could feel herself shifting in a way that she knew was not typical.
Right. And that's so powerful. And what that also says is that you raised a conversation around mental health, mental stability. And I think often we don't talk with our kids, especially early enough, I would say, about, hey, how are you feeling? What are your emotions? Can you put words to it? What patterns are we seeing in it? Because then for me, I didn't know any of my mental health challenges until I was probably 25, 30 years old. And then when I looked back and was able to say, oh, that's why those days were so hard.
Right.
That's why I felt like I was so different. Oh, that's why I had times where it was like, is anybody else having a hard time? Why is it just
Mm-hmm.
me? And then you
Not
think
just
something's
you.
wrong with you, and then you get self-conscious. So I think if we have these conversations with our kids sooner versus later, not only will they be so self-aware that they can say, hey, something doesn't seem right,
Mm-hmm.
but also that they don't feel broken.
Right.
And I think so many of us grew up feeling broken that then it takes years of effort. I mean, again, like you, I've been in counseling since I was 18.
Yeah.
So years of effort to sort of get
Unravel
out
it.
of that hole that you found yourself in and that you didn't put yourself in. Someone kind of put you there.
Right.
And then you are the one responsible to get yourself out. And that's the hard part.
Right. Right. And we are all each responsible for getting ourselves out.
Right.
But I think as parents, teaching our children how to recognize, how to name, how to explain what their feelings are
Right.
in the moment is of primary importance.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
they don't know from the womb, you know,
Right.
they just know they're feeling something. They don't know what it is or how to explain it or what to
Exactly.
do about it. And it's up to us to give them that emotional education, that literacy, so that they know what their own emotional maps are.
Yes.
And I think that I know that I worked very hard to do that with both my kids.
Yes.
And I do that with, I'm a high school English teacher also. And so I do that even with my own students on,
yes.
on a different level. But I want to know what they're thinking, what
Yes.
they're feeling. I want them to be able to recognize what that is and not just dismiss it or, you know,
blindly accept it.
Blindly accept
Yeah.
it. Exactly. It's imperative because it's never, maybe not never, that's probably the wrong word, but it's rarely as scary,
Yes.
mystifying, derailing, whatever, when we can name it and talk about it and recognize it than it is if it's just this amorphous thing we're ruminating about in our brain on that hamster wheel forever.
Always. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I talk largely about exactly that, especially with kids who have a trouble with behavioral management or who are very, quote, impulsive or have a tough time socializing with peers because they're so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tell parents, you know, they're not, like you said, they're not going to just come up to you and say, I'm feeling sad. Let's
Right.
take a break, unless you teach them that.
Exactly.
So if you can't say you're looking sad, you're acting like you're upset about something, do you know what that is? Let's
Mm-hmm.
discuss it. And then
Right.
normalize it by saying, I had a hard time today. I got really sad and I didn't know what to do with it either. That's part of life sometimes,
Right.
but I figured it out by doing X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't talk about it at home, then feelings seem so atypical.
Right.
That when I feel them as a child, not only can't I name them, but I feel like, well, no one else has these things in them. So
Right.
what's wrong with me that I feel? And then that's where I would grew up, is any negative feeling is not a valid feeling. You should always be positive. You should always be appreciative. You should always be happy. And so then when you feel anything other than that, you think, well, gosh, I guess I'll just ignore that, or like, ooh, I don't even know what that feeling is. And then when you get older and feel anger and feel sad and feel scared, you have no coping skills because you've been told that none of those emotions are valid.
Right. And then you ignore them so long that
absolutely
there's going to be a mind-body problem.
Yep.
You're going to wind up sick. You're going to wind up anxious. You're going to wind up with other things that are a byproduct of stuffing
absolutely
in the corner. Right.
Yeah. And now my anxiety is insane. I mean, there's moments where just dishes piling up will lead me to like a panic attack. Just knowing things aren't how, quote, they should be. And then, you know, you think, gosh, it's just dishes.
Right.
It's not that big of a deal. Just calm down. They'll get done. Right. It's, you know, you're a new mom. You have a business. You also are this and that. And no part of your brain will accept any of those excuses except go do the dishes so that you can get the anxiety gone. And so you
could also look at doing those dishes as a moment of mindfulness.
And it could, yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
And I've started to approach dishes that way, you know.
I like that.
mindfulness and meditation are not necessarily sitting and being quiet.
Right.
For me, they're usually sensory experiences. So
Mm.
when I'm drawing or painting, for me, that's meditative and mindful.
Right.
Doing the dishes, I had J.A. Plosker on the podcast probably about a month ago, and he was talking about doing the dishes and focusing on what the water feels like on your hands and what the skin
Ah,
feels like on your hands,
I
and
like that.
really focusing on cleaning that one dish and cleaning the one glass, and that in itself calms you down. You've got the sensory, you've got the
Right.
mindful. You're only focusing on that one task for the 5 minutes that you're doing that.
Right.
And it gets the dishes done.
Right.
Therefore, there's nothing to be anxious about. It's giving you a couple of minutes to be calm. It sounds ridiculous because it's so simple, but it's brilliant.
Often the simple stuff is the most brilliant stuff.
Right?
I found in my process that the little things are the ones that I like to use the most. So I'm going to
Yeah.
try that next time. That's great.
Yeah. And stuff, I find that non-text based,
Right.
I don't have words in them, activities can often be mindfully meditative.
Right.
You know?
And that's how, for me, nature is that big thing for me. A couple
Yeah.
days ago, I just sat outside in the yard with my son and my dog, and we weren't doing anything, and that was perfect. But it was a
Yeah.
time where I could literally look around and say, ah,
Exactly.
and I could feel my body release. I could feel my brain slow down, and all of that like constant go, 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 go vibe
Right.
was able to sort of dissipate. And I think
And your son needs you to do that too.
absolutely
Because
he
he can
does.
pick on your
Oh, yes.
energy and on your like, I'm always,
Yes.
always, always going. And you're
Yes.
teaching him from literally infancy
Yeah.
that self-care and taking time out is important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that I don't remember learning. And so it is really crucial that I put that in his pathology and that I give him that tool. I mean, I think as parents and as a society, we expect our kids to have tools in their toolbox that we never gave them.
Sure.
How are we going to expect them to be able to handle all these things that they're faced with, but no one taught them how to do that? It's not just natural. Nature has very few things to do with how we live anymore. And most of it is biological, neurological, psychological, and it will happen whether we choose to or not. But what we can do is adjust the way it does that and adjust the way our body handles situations so that when we're stressed or worried or anxious, we have some tools in our toolkit. But it's weird that as a society, kids who are anxious or worried or aggressive, the first thing we do is say, like, what's wrong? Like, why are you stop doing that, instead of
right. We get
what's
punitive and
leading to this
judgmental.
situation.
Right.
Right. If this is always happening, always at science time or always at lunch, have we thought about what's the pattern? Is it because, they don't know who to sit with, so they get anxious and then they start being aggressive, so they get sent to the to the teacher's room, and now they finally have someone to sit with? Right. Or, are we sitting there having a hard time with science because in science time, I have to find a partner and I don't know how to ask someone to be my partner? And so those little things that if we sit back and say, what's going on? Instead of stop it, just get it together. It's just science class. You did fine in math. What's the problem? Let's go. And I think if we do more what's going on questions with our kids and with our families, we will have a very different generation in front of us. And that's what I'm hoping for, because I know right now for me, I worry about where our generation's going to be with COVID and the traumas related to COVID, related to Black Lives Matter, related to LGBTQ rights, related to Asian hate, related to, all of these things that our kids are hearing about, but who's talking to them about it?
And society, I see this as a teacher's point of view, and I am shackled by mainstream, whatever that means, community beliefs. And I'm not allowed to talk about politics in class.
Right.
I can talk about Black Lives Matter, but I I have to walk a line
Yep.
between and not make kids feel bad.
It has to be factual, and it has to be right.
Right. I can talk about racism. I can talk about ageism and feminism and sexism and all of this stuff. I mean, as an English teacher, that's what people write about.
Right.
You know, so this is what we have to talk about it, but it's in a thematic,
Yes.
conceptual sort of way,
Right.
not in a
Applied.
right.
Yeah.
And they need it applied, but
Yes.
their parents are scared to death.
Yes.
I live in New York, which is predominantly Democratic. It's usually a blue state.
Right.
But Long Island, surprisingly enough, is a red, very red.
Mm.
And I feel like the lone, I'm not, but I
Right,
feel
the
like
lone blue.
The lone blue Jew in
Yeah.
the middle of a red, and which is totally not the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But what I'm hearing as a connected educator who knows a lot of teachers across Long Island is that we are all facing a disconnection, a problem. Yeah. There's a push for more diversity in literature. We
right.
not only want people of color as authors, but also as the subject matter,
right,
and as the thematic connection, because as the student body demographics themselves become more diverse, and there are way more people of color than there've ever been, which is a beautiful, fabulous thing.
Right.
They need to start seeing themselves
Absolutely.
reflected back.
Absolutely.
They don't want to just keep reading Old Man in the Sea. If I had to
right.
keep teaching that, I'd shoot myself. Forget it.
Yes.
I would quit my job.
Yes.
But, so I want to bring in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I want to bring in Alice Walker, and I want to bring in people of color. We read The Namesake by
yes,
which I love, and I want to bring in more stuff, but the patriarchy,
yep,
the Caucasian patriarchy, who is in power,
yep,
and have always been,
yep,
are afraid of the diversity in
absolutely
literature, because they don't want, the way I understand it, is that they don't want our children, their children, to think that being white is bad.
Right. Oh yeah, that'd be horrible.
Which is
almost as if you've been raised your whole life thinking not being white was bad.
Right.
Huh.
Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. And you know, that's interesting you say that.
It makes my brain explode.
Yeah.
Because there's no reasoning with them. They agree on paper that diversity is good.
Except
in literature, but
in real life.
Want it taught to their kids.
In my kids, not in my backyard. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was speaking to, that's funny you say that. Yesterday I had lunch with my best friend, and she is also a woman of color. And we often have these conversations because we're both mixed race women and raising brown babies with Black men. And so we were talking about exactly that, the challenge of how do you create an environment for your child where they feel accepted, not just by their family, but by their bigger world around them, when everything they see, everything they read, everything they hear tells them that they're going to go to jail, go to prison, not be educated, live off of welfare, and or
they're not going to earn as much money.
Right. The only way to be successful is to be a rapper or to play basketball or to be a football star. You know, what are we telling our children that they can be and will be? And like you just said, if I don't go to school and see anybody that looks like me in administration, I see no one that looks like me teaching me. I read nothing about people that look like me unless it's February.
Right.
Or they're teaching slavery, or they might be teaching about, you know, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, or the handful of people they teach us about. Then who am I?
Right.
Where did I come from? Am I only coming from slaves?
If I'm
Have
not
I not been
in this community, right?
Right. Am I not coming from people who are successful, people who have great minds, people who work together, people who are able to, you know, forgive and forget and move forward? And I think that's where we re-traumatize and start traumatizing our kids of color is, you know, from jump. I only see people that look like me if they're being arrested on TV, or lately if they're being shot by cops.
Right.
And I don't see anybody that looks like me doing anything that I can say, yes, I want to be that person. And so when we do see that in our vice president, we see that. When we see that in,
but it's
the
not
world,
the norm. It's
so atypical that we're all
right.
like, woohoo, a brown person successful. And it is great. But the fact that it's so atypical, that it is so highly celebrated.
At least it's starting. At least
Absolutely.
seeing more and hearing more of these conversations. And, we're starting to see, if you look at Congress now,
right,
to see a lot
Thank
more
goodness.
people of color and women.
LGBTQ individuals are being represented finally.
And I think, I hope, I know this is partly going to sound really awful, but as the white patriarchal older generation passes away into oblivion, maybe we'll start to see more systemic change. Because at the same time, I was listening to what you were saying before about like COVID and all of these other like things that I know they're making that the teenager generation right now, I don't know what generation they
are. I mean, either. I'm not sure what they're called these days.
Whatever. But they're at the same time that they've grown up with Black Lives Matter, and they've grown up with school shootings, and they've grown up with all of these catastrophic, terrible, traumatic things. They're also more open to diversity. Like,
absolutely,
same-sex marriage is a no-brainer. They don't give a shit.
Right.
Love who you love.
It doesn't impact me. It makes you happy. Let's do it. I'm all about it.
Right. They don't care about color, like your black, brown, gray, purple, plaid. Who cares?
Yeah.
They're so like beyond that. Let's recognize the beauty in all of our diversity, and that's the conversation. But what are we doing after? Where are we going to eat?
Absolutely.
Like, it's not like a huge deal.
Yeah.
So they're like hopeless in some and hopeful in some.
Yes.
And it's
a tough combo.
Yeah, it's a
I mean, within the same year of us having a vice president that's finally of color and female, we also have George Floyd and the outcomes related to that. And so, yeah, absolutely.
And now all of the social media wars going on about that the policeman who killed him being sentenced.
Right. Really? There's just so much. And I think, like you've just mentioned, the challenge I believe in social media and the world that is social media is, it's so easy to support your own feelings. I mean, I only follow people that agree with me. I don't follow a bunch of Republicans who are gun nuts who love Trump. But the challenge is, because of that, I also don't often think outside of what is my normal thinking.
Right. We see
ourselves. So if I don't think out of my normal thinking pattern, how and when am I growing and developing? And so what I think is really critical that we teach our kids are, to be that devil's advocate, even in our own head, just to allow ourselves to learn. How do we problem solve? How do we work with people that we don't necessarily agree with? You're going to have to work in situations where you have to sort of swallow a lot of tough conversations because the person that you work with or work for doesn't necessarily support your perspective. And
isn't that the beauty of a democratic republic?
And that's just what it is. And instead of us thinking, oh my gosh, I only want to work with these people, we have almost self-corrected to the wrong. I mean, we sit there and say, oh gosh, well, I don't want to be associated with all, with that. I'm not to that level of red. But, we also have to recognize, does that then separate me from being a part of a conversation? Because if I don't associate with the patriarchy, guess who's not part of the conversation? I'm not.
Exactly.
And yes, I disagree with it, but at some point I have to be around it to change it.
Right. If you completely divorce yourself from it and you're not engaged in the conversation, you're also not engaged in the change.
Exactly.
And the rebirth of something new.
Exactly. And I think that's where often I find myself as a mixed woman really challenged in, where do I support, the Black community, the community of individuals who identify as being mixed race or brown, while also I was adopted into a fully white family. And so how do I allow myself to reconcile frustration towards the patriarch, who is upper class white men, which is my father. Honestly, he's an
Right.
upper class white man.
Right.
And so how do I still accept, admire, and love who he is, but not have to necessarily accept, love, and appreciate the world around what he is?
Mm-hmm.
And he and I have a lot of great conversations around that. And he uses his patriarchy and his whiteness, to be honest, to change. I mean, he works specifically in racial relations and understanding how we change, policing, and how do we change,
Well, I think to a degree it has to come from
absolutely.
not only us, but also the white patriarchy
Yep.
themselves has to be willing to change and
Yes.
speak out to reform that concept.
Yes.
Because otherwise it's not
It
going to
won't
happen.
change. Yes. And that's what I think, again, my friend and I talked about yesterday. I think that's what's tough is,
Yeah.
yes, numbers can change things. Absolutely. But the challenge is we're the minority, even in numbers.
Sure.
So when you think about how do you change the world, you have to change it through the system that's there already. And that doesn't mean the system has to be there forever. Ideally, it won't. But currently it is. And in that, how do we create conversations with those who are a part of that patriarchal norm so that they hear us as humans? They don't see us just as data points. They don't see us just as, a news story, but they see us as a family member, as an entity. And again, I think that's where families are being re-traumatized, is when we can't sit down and say, I see how these things are impacting how you raise your children.
Right.
I see that you have to tell your son that if a cop is around, don't go grabbing something out of the, glove compartment. Put your hands up, even if you know you did nothing wrong. I mean, to have to say that to a young child who doesn't even know what racism necessarily is yet, and that the cops, the people that are there to protect you, are sometimes the ones you have to be protected from. How do you tell them that? And so I think the reality of the trauma that we're all facing is how do you say the things that are real without creating a woe is me childhood?
Right.
How do you say this is really where we are without also creating a child who thinks, well, who cares then? No matter how hard I work, the system's against me. No matter how hard I work, I get paid 80 cents to the man's dollar. No matter how hard I work, a cop's going to pull me over just because I'm brown. Right. And how do you say to them, yes, but you can still be bigger and better than all of that?
So how do you answer that? What do you do?
For me, what I have to do and what I have to say is it starts individually with the people around you. Mm-hmm. You have to be around love. You have to be around people who say, yep, that's not fair. Yep, that's messed up. Yep, I acknowledge the trauma that creates for who you are and who you become. But guess what? I will be there for you as you challenge it. I will be in your corner when you feel like it is bigger than you. Mm-hmm. And I will find you the resources you need if I don't have them. And I think as parents, having to say you have a need that I can't fill is very humbling.
Sure.
And it's exhausting, I imagine, if it happens more than once. But that's where, as a community, I think it's so critical that we understand trauma, because if a child comes to me and says, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to be bigger than this problem. And when I go home, my parents say, well, that's just how it is.
Right.
Then how can I, as an educator and as a professional, say, yeah, it is how it is, but it doesn't have to always be. And then let's learn about people who are challenging those norms. Let's learn about how did they go from, oh my gosh, I'm going to be stuck in this, to, okay, how do I change the systems I feel stuck in?
Right.
And that
and
means,
my own reaction to, and my own response
to. Exactly.
Right.
And that means, like you said, going to have conversations with school boards to say, hey, my kid deserves to see them just as much as your kid deserves to see themselves in books, in literature, in history. Mm-hmm. So we have to do something about it. And now more than ever, we have to just advocate. We have to advocate for ourselves, but we have to advocate for sure for our kids, because I worry, And I think that the trauma that we are on the verge of right now is a trauma we're not prepared for.
Right.
I don't think as a nation we're prepared at all for the backlash of what has happened in the last year and a half of our children being isolated,
Sure.
being ignored, not being seen by third parties.
Mm-hmm.
And when they go back to school in the fall, we're going to find out that more happened than we know. And it won't be because a kid comes up and says, hey, my mom has now a mental health illness that never was addressed, and my dad's been abusing substances, and our finances are in a bad spot. So they both have been really stressed out. What we're going to see are kids getting aggressive, kids being scared, kids refusing to go to school because they're scared if they do, their mom might get hit by dad because no one's ever been helping them. Sure. I mean, all these things that we want to say, like you said, on paper, I read all kinds of articles. Oh, on paper, mental health is, awareness. We need to be more aware. It's going to go up. We have to be more aware of substance abuse. Statistically, it's increasing. Great. Those numbers are really helpful.
But what does that look like when we have our boots on the ground?
Exactly.
What does that look like in real time when I'm on the front lines in a classroom facing 25 students in my room? What is that going to look like?
Right.
And for the last year, I've been teaching virtually and I've been teaching online at the same time, physically in the classroom. But all of the kids, even till the last day of school, were in masks. So I don't know what my students looked like.
Yes.
And they didn't speak because the masks were like muzzles over their faces.
Absolutely.
So I didn't get to know, except the few most vocal of them.
Right.
Most of my students were complete strangers to me throughout the entire year. And I barely knew their names, let alone anything about them.
Right.
Because it was a totally different, really surreal school year in that regard. And
yes.
And so September comes, and God willing, we won't be facing a resurgence of COVID, and we'll go to school without masks, and things will be much more back to normal, sort of.
Right. But
forget learning delays and deficits in content knowledge and skills and all of that stuff. What is the mental landscape going to be look like for these kids? How are they going to interact with each other in a academic, social sort of setting?
Yep, absolutely. And I think another thing that I imagine, and again, I don't want to speak for teachers, but I'm married to one and most of my friends are teachers, is teachers also didn't go to school to become a teacher to sit in their house and do Zoom.
No.
They went to school to connect with children. They went to be advocates. They went to be able to say, I'm that person when you have no other person. Right. And so they have also lost a lot of that opportunity in who they were.
Our own mental struggles.
Exactly.
And
so on top of it, on top of it, not only have the children and the students struggled, absolutely, and the families, absolutely, but also the teachers have their own families. The teachers have their own children. The teachers have their own relationships. And so they have also spent a year and a half being relatively silenced, if you will, because you just go in, you teach, and you turn off. And you can't turn off, really. I mean, people that are teachers are empaths. As professionals, we do this because we feel. We do this because we connect, because we engage. We want to build relationships and modulate. And we want to do all these things that for our last year and a half, we really haven't had a chance to do much of.
Right.
And so that has impacted how we see ourselves. That's impacted how we feel our skills and strengths have been used. And so perhaps our own self-esteem has been hit. Perhaps our own trauma has been ignored. And now I also have to bounce back and in September, go teach these kids as if I didn't also experience my own trauma.
Right.
And that's why.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that from the get-go. Say to them, look, everything that you just said, say directly to the students. We all underwent this thing for more than a year and a half of our lives.
Yes.
Which was a larger percentage of their lives as young people
Absolutely.
than my own. And we need to recognize the individual, community, and societal impact of that, and be open with ourselves and with each other as we try to figure our way out of the weeds.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think we have to have those conversations as openly as that with our students.
Yes,
so that they from the get-go know that if they're feeling like they're lost in the weeds, they're not lost in the weeds.
Exactly.
We're all lost in the weeds together. And
Exactly.
we'll figure our way out.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what it is. We're going to have some very candid conversations. And that's why, for me, I shifted my business from family coaching specifically to more professional development for individuals that work with families. Because not only do I want professionals to know that they are seen and that they are understood, that they have also experienced trauma, but they're going to be thrown out there in the front lines. And who has told them, A, how to handle the situations for and with their students,
right? But
B, how to do so and still be a parent as themselves, or in a couple, or in a relationship, or not in a relationship, but one, like,
right.
All
how
of
do
these
we navigate
things,
the complicated landscape
again,
of our own lives?
Right. Well, have we given them the tools, or are we demanding them to build something and then not giving them the tools to do so? Right. And I think the same thing happens with professionals that work with families and children, is they are going to be flooded with all of this information. And I want to be a part of the conversation saying, hey, not only are you seen, but I see, and we acknowledge that you need extra support in learning how to handle this when you have a kid that comes in and says they haven't eaten breakfast in the last year and a half, and thank goodness I finally have breakfast. Right. Or someone who's not getting picked up on time. What's going on at home? Do we have enough teachers to do home visits? Are we prepared for all of the psychological and all of these conversations? And to say, where are the resources that we're giving our frontline people? Are we giving them what they need to feel strong and to feel successful? Because otherwise, we're going to traumatize them by throwing them into the sharks and say, well, remember, you're the teacher, so the kids are coming to you. Well, yeah, but what do you want me? I have to teach. Right. How am I supposed to teach and do all these things? And you've given me none of the skills to do so. Exactly.
And very far more often, the professional development that we're given is irrelevant to the tasks at
Absolutely.
It never seems to match the reality of what we're facing. In many cases, I feel like that the professional development that we're offered is for like the teacher dealing with Stepford students.
Yes.
Like, we're ready to learn. What are we doing today? But nobody's like that.
No.
Not even the valedictorian is like that.
No.
And I don't feel like the PD is grounded in reality.
No. It's a checkbox. It's, okay, we have to offer 4.5 hours every quarter. So what are we going to offer? We're going to offer the same thing we always offer. Well, that's fine, except things are not how they always have been.
No.
And if we are always going to do things the way we've always done things, then we might as well all stop already with the battle of patriarchy, because we're just going to accept that that's just what it is.
Exactly.
So
our school district did a thing like 2 years ago. The best professional development afternoon I spent in 26 years of teaching.
Ooh.
They had a guy, I don't remember the guy's name, but they had a guy who was like a mental health mindfulness guru, and he didn't talk to us about teaching. He didn't talk to us about education milestones or grades or testing. He talked to us about self-care.
Yes.
And we did meditation, and we did mindfulness exercises, and we did like seated yoga kind of, because we were all of us in an auditorium, and it was the best day.
Yes. And that's what we need more of. I mean, I read something, I follow, of course, a lot of trauma, Instagrams and all that. And I read something that said, a parent came to me and asked, what should I do to work on my child's academics this summer? And I told them, don't.
Yeah.
Let them be social beings. Let them play. Let them work on social movement. Let them work on motor movement. Let them understand emotions.
Right.
Do plays with them. Do imagination work with them, because we could try to quote catch them up, and we could try to fill the gap. That's also going to be important in the future. Yes. But their trauma is so rooted in their development that if we don't build the development, who cares about the academics?
Exactly.
If they aren't able to wait in line, and if they're not able to wash their hands without losing it, If they're not able to walk down a hallway without being distracted and just wandering, then who cares if they're getting A's? Because they can't apply any of it.
Right.
So yes, we want successful, strong academics. That's great, of course. But to get there, we can't just jump straight to the top.
No, we got to go back to Maslow. We
Absolutely.
need basic, higher order of needs. We need
Yes.
basic safety. We need basic comfort. We need basic calm,
Yes.
connection. We need to slow down.
Yes.
And build that foundation. Otherwise, everything is irrelevant.
Absolutely it is.
Everything else. So, like you said, motor skills, running around, playing in nature, climbing trees, being in swimming pools or whatever.
Yes.
Hanging out with their friends.
Exactly.
Even reading time with parents. Like, I used to sit with my kids and we read 3 bedtime stories or 3 storybooks a night before bed. And that was part of our routine. And that parental child connection, using books as vehicles to have conversations about how people feel and relationships and whatever,
Absolutely.
That's all important. And jumping back into reading, writing, arithmetic is the wrong move.
It's silly. I worry that that's yet another time where we're going to realize, we put the cart before the horse. And again, if we're going to do that, September, October, November is going to look very challenging for all of us. If we don't sit and say, all right, let's think about how a child develops. What happens to them that makes them develop? They move, they socialize, they eat, they talk, they touch, they feel.
Right.
Well, they've been in a house for a year and a half. And like you said, there's some students, that's half of their academic career. Some students, that's all of their academic career.
Depending
Kindergartners,
on their age,
they have no idea.
Nothing else. Right.
So some of them will go in the fall in first grade or second grade, having never been in the building. And instead of us going on a tour and saying, this is what this is who this is, we're going to say, sit down. All right, now let's work on our ABCs. And meanwhile, the kids are going to be like, where are we? Who are you?
Right. We're going to need to go back.
When does mom come?
Right. Absolutely. 100%.
So I think there's bigger conversations to be had. And I'm glad that you and I are connecting, because I think these kinds of connections are what start those kinds of conversations. And it's what allows me, especially as a professional, to get feedback from someone such as yourself, who is, like you said, in the trenches, to be able to say, all right, how do I shift what I do so that I can truly support teachers in what they do? And parents, as a parent who has older kids versus me, who has a 6-month-old, how do I get this feedback from parents in an honest environment where they can say, I'm not even worried about my kid's grades. I just want my kid to have a friend. I just want to make sure that my kid is able to have a play date and that they're not scared because of the virus. Because think about it. A child doesn't know what COVID is, but they just know that there's something out there that makes people sick.
And so, that interaction with people we don't know is the thing that does it. Like, you can't even hang out with your neighbor.
Exactly. So how do I developmentally rationalize that all of a sudden now I'm allowed to go make friends? But what about that scary virus, Mom? I'm going to get sick. I don't want to go over there. I don't want to go to school. Right. Everyone's going to make me sick. I don't want to get sick. You said if Grandpa got sick and he died. Like, what?
Right.
So how are we going to reintroduce our children to being social beings? And I think that we're just going to drop them in and say, see ya at 3 is a huge mistake.
Absolutely. We need to have ongoing, very open conversations over time, not just one and done.
Right.
About this.
Yes.
To reinforce everything that you just said. I don't need to reiterate it.
Yeah.
It's important. I know that, I was an English teacher. I am an English teacher. So it's important that the kids do the content that they are supposed to be doing, sure. But I was very worried from the very beginning about their mental health. And I kept saying this to my director. Like, she's like, well, what are your big milestone goals for the year? And I'm like, for all of us to survive until June without suiciding.
Yes.
That's my goal.
That's a legit goal.
That's a legit goal, right? I don't want them turning to substances. I don't want them, turning to unhealthy behaviors.
Yep.
I want them to feel like there's some measure of control. So almost every Friday of the entire school year, we watched TED Talks and did yoga videos, and
That's
we
perfect.
talked about mindfulness, and we
Yes.
talked about inclusivity, and we talked about how and it was mostly me monologuing because the kids weren't talking, most of them.
Yeah.
But I had most kids, and I teach 11th and 12th grade, so they're a little jaded, and
Right.
they're worried about their street cred and like how they're going to look stupid. And
I'm going to pretend that I don't totally feel all the things she's saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm up doing yoga and stretching or whatever and I've got this. I don't lead them, but I do it with them because I've got a video up on the smart board, and most of the kids were up doing it. I'm like, there's no such thing as looking silly.
No.
You look silly if you're the only one sitting and
Not
everyone
doing
else
it.
is doing it.
Right.
That's when you look silly. And so we, can you bend over and reach your toes? Like, where's the tension in your back? What can we do to alleviate that?
Right.
And it may seem stupid, but it helped. And for a lot of the kids, that was what they remembered out of my class.
That's,
and
that's perfect, because what it also means is they remembered that they matter. They're being seen. Their body is a vessel for all of their everythings, and that they have power over the feelings and the anxieties and the stressors.
And it gives them a tool to combat that they can take with them forever. Right.
Yes. Because otherwise, like you said, I'm sure suicide rates are or will be up once life returns. It's going to spike again. Self-harm, substance abuse around, preteen, teenish ages. And then now they're going to go back to school and feel all the pressures of being, quote, cool, and all the pressures of fitting in. And all of that is going to be on top of these
the normal
layers.
Teen angst, the normal shit.
You couldn't pay me to be a 14-year-old again.
Oh God, no.
But definitely not during these times. And then they're supposed to just go to school and learn and get ready for high school. And then high schoolers are supposed to get ready for college. Well, that's all well and good. But if we drop them all off at college a year from now, and none of them know how to handle any part of reality, we're going to, again, see an increase in unwanted childbirth. We're going to see an increase in substance abuse, mental health issues, because they didn't know they had these issues until life slapped them in the face.
Right.
So, yeah, I think the only solution to all of these future problems is to A, acknowledge that they're going to be coming, and B, to talk about how do we create a conversation and environments where kids can say, I don't know what the heck's going on with life.
Right.
It's happy and it's scary and it's worrisome, and I'm excited and I'm also scared, and I'm also don't even know who I am because I haven't been around humans for 2 years.
Right.
So who do I turn to? And parents aren't trained in child development.
No,
They're not trained.
We're all ill-equipped in figuring it out as we go.
Exactly. So, who are we to say, oh, well, turn to your parents, or, that's a parent's job. The school's job is to educate. Well, education can look like a lot of things.
The whole child, not just the academic portion of the child.
Exactly. I went to a private school and I did great. Education, great. Got a 3.8 in middle school, high school, great. Well, that doesn't mean that as soon as I went to college, I wasn't like, what is reality?
Right.
Who are these people? How do I function? How do I protect myself from others? I was naive and trusted everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that no one taught. But woohoo, I got a 3.8. So, I guess I'm ready for college.
Right.
So I think that's the challenge, is like you just said, are we doing our children good by creating this academia that is, top notch, and that if you reach it, you've succeeded? Or are we doing them a disservice by saying that's all that matters and that's all that anyone will see? Because I thought, I got into a good college, I'm done.
Right.
I did all the things. And yet I graduate in debt with real life experiences I didn't know were coming to me. Mm-hmm. And now I have to juggle this mental health, mental illness things that I didn't even know was a thing.
Right.
And because no one talked to me about it, I thought I was broken.
Mm-hmm.
And also still managed to get a 3 point. All these things where you think, okay, my emotions are not important. That's not the critical part. I need to keep going to class no matter how my depression is impacting me. I need to keep going even if it's impacting me and traumatizing me. I have to go to class. I have to get a good grade. I can't be late on this, that, and the other. And then all of a sudden you realize, and
right.
Nobody in that I'm working for or working with gives a crap that I got a 3.8.
No.
The fact of the matter is, I still have to call off of work because I still have panic attacks and I can't go to work.
Because you never learned to deal with it.
Exactly. So how am I any better off than if I got a 2.5 and was actually a human person who knew how to handle emotions, who knew where my tools were and how to use them and put them back for next time? And I think that's where we have to really buckle down and stop saying once you reach the upper class of academia, you've made it, because you haven't. You are just now becoming an adult, so get ready. But also,
the only thing you've become good at is compartmentalizing your life.
Exactly. And ignoring the parts that are probably going to sneak up one day way or another.
Oh, no, probably about it. Definitely.
Exactly. And one day you're going to be driving.
Variable is when.
And all of a sudden you smell the smell of fresh cut grass and you start having a panic attack. You have to pull over and you don't know why.
Right. Exactly.
Well, then what do? Call your boss and say, I smelled grass. I can't come in. Like, what are you supposed to say? And then I think the important thing too is, as supervisors, as leaders, can we say to someone, take a mental health day? I acknowledge that you're struggling. I acknowledge that you had a tough morning or something impacted you. I need you to go home. I need you to stay healthy. I need you to stay safe. That's what's what important.
Sick days are for. They're not just for strep throat. They're for days where you just can't get your head off the pillow.
Right.
Because it's too big and too
right. And to say you have to go to a doctor and get a note, or well, what if I have a mental health issue? I can't go to a doctor who says her mental health was up today. Who do I turn to?
That's just a ridiculous rule, because if you're home because you have a cold or you have the flu or a stomach virus, no doctor is going to see you. You don't need to go to the doctor.
Right.
So what's the point?
That's where ridiculous. Policies.
Or you have menstrual cramps that are debilitating. You don't need a doctor for that.
Right.
You need Advil and a heating pad,
Right. And you need to be able to just say, I'm not going to come in. I can't. And again, this is where, for me as a trauma survivor, I realize I always give explanations, and often too much of one. Yeah. Instead of saying, I'm not going to make it, and having that be the end, I feel like I have to say, because of this and without this and if that and that, and then I'm sitting here explaining why it's acceptable for me to protect myself, mental or physically.
Right.
And that's traumatizing, because what it tells you is it's not enough to just say no.
And no is a complete sentence.
It's a complete sentence. And then we teach kids no means no. Well, does it though? Because we're not really in a society where we accept no as an answer. Right. We accept no, but we accept no because we accept no, however, but do we accept no as its full 2-letter sentence? Rarely. And that's where we have to let kids say, no, I can't. Okay. I hear you. I feel that you can't right now. I'm asking too much of you. Let me give you a break. Instead of, well, too bad you have to.
Right. There are some times where that is the answer.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There will be moments.
But most of the time, I have kids, like even something silly like due dates. I have an essay that's due Friday.
Right.
And a kid will come to me and say, I have X, Y, and Z going on. There's no way I'm going to be able. Can I hand it into? Sure.
Right.
You're handing it in for a reasonable reason a day or two or even a week later doesn't affect my life at all.
Right. You're going to get a grade. It's going to get done. I'm going to grade it. All right, I get it.
And if you've got an issue, if there's something going on and you need more time, take it.
Absolutely.
I would rather wait for a better product than get a crappy product now and make you crazy.
And that's what I think then, if that's the case, if the latter is what the norm becomes or is, then we create that same feeling in a work environment where I'd rather you show up and half-ass it, and at least you're here, than you show up tomorrow or 2 days from now feeling stronger, feeling rejuvenated, feeling like you heard yourself and addressed your own needs. Right. Because then also I can give better back. But I think this policy and this expectation of superhuman, super moms, super dads, people who don't have feelings and don't have to stop their life to handle them, and no matter what, you just keep going. Just keep going.
Well,
Just work all the jobs, all the hours, all the things, and parent, and clean, and cook, and do yoga, and make time to clean your dogs and clean the house. I mean, some days you have to be able to just be like, nope, today I'm going to do none of that, because if I do, I will break.
Right.
And if I break, I will break hard. So I have to hear my body. I have to hear my soul. I have to hear my trauma systems telling me, hello, there's a little voice back there saying, we're on the verge here. If you keep pushing us, we're going to have to go in one direction or the other. And if those directions, for me, I have very unhealthy coping skills. I'm still learning at 35 how to handle frustration.
Right.
And so if I wait for that sound to get louder and louder and louder and louder, then my options will be less and less and likely unsafe. Whereas if I am taught and continue to teach kids in the future that once that sound starts, stop what you're doing, hear the voice, acknowledge the voice, and do something that will calm it back down.
Exactly. I think that there's a societal template where I think we're taught that we're only valuable and worthy if we are producing something. You know, that our productivity is what gives us value and worthiness. And it's 100% wrong.
Yes.
That I just heard a couple of days ago, I heard somebody say we are human beings. So our worthiness and our value is in being. We're not human doings.
Yes, I love that.
Is doing things. So if you have to take time out to just be, then that's perfectly valid.
Yes, I think that's great. And I agree. I think, you know, one of the things I've realized over the last couple of years is one of my coping skills used to be to just work more.
Oh, that's hello. There.
Yeah, my adult life, I had 2, if not 3 jobs always. If I was done at one job by 5, I could get to another job by 6. Sure. If I didn't have to work on the weekends, I could have a job on the weekends. Rarely was it financial. What I'm learning later is it was to avoid sitting in my house and feeling.
Right.
And
if avoiding yourself.
Right. If I'm being productive, I can put one more thing on my resume. I can say one more skill that I have. I can have one more person vouch for my ability to be and my existence as a professional, instead of saying, you know what, having one job is sufficient. Doing it well as often as you can is enough. And then your other job is to hear your body, hear your system, hear your soul, and do what that is telling you.
Go do things that bring you joy.
And that's what I'm new to. People ask me, what are your hobbies? I hang out with my son, and I hang out with my dogs, and I hang out with my husband.
Well, you have a newborn. So, I mean,
even prior to that, right. I just, what I'm pointing out is just like, I don't know that we're creating children and futures. And for my generation, where we have been pushed to work.
Right.
Whether it's by choice or to pay off your crazy school loans because you were told to go to school.
Right.
But either way, you work. And then at some point you stop and you look around and you realize, have I been living? Right. Like I have a tattoo that says, don't survive, be alive. Because I have to remind myself that I don't have to just get by all the time. I can stop and I can be in the moment and I can live the moment. I can feel the feelings. It's okay to not know what they are. It's okay to sort of have to sit there and journal through it. But that's something that at 35, I'm learning. And I hope that in the future, I can and will teach younger individuals.
Including your son.
Yes.
It's important to play.
Those are things that just be in it. Just feel it. And when it comes, it comes. When it goes, it goes. That's the process of life. It's ebb and flow. Instead of thinking feelings, I need to work more. I just need to get out of the house and go do.
Recently, I heard Brene Brown talking about the importance and physical, mental, psychological benefits of play. And she, huge. Like you and I, worked all the time and was always very productive and play. What do you mean play? What does that mean?
Right.
But ever since I heard her talking on her podcast, Unlocking Us, about that, I have been trying to do one activity each day for no other reason than I enjoy it. I'm not looking to create something. I'm not looking to sell something. I'm not looking to build something. I'm not looking to be productive or to clean something. I am doing one thing for myself just because it's fun. And it has no other purpose than that.
I love it. And I agree. And I think, and I think what that also says to ourselves is you're worth it. You're worthy of it. You know, you're worth stopping and acknowledging yourself as an existent human person and not just giving. And I think for the work that you do, I imagine, and for the work that a lot of us empaths do is, as they always say, you know, you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, yes, that's true. But then also, how do I refill my cup? What are my skills that I have where I can go home? And my counselor told me a couple of days ago, take your cape off. You are always
to save the world all the time.
Always in mask and cape, even at your house. Take your cape off, put it somewhere for the next day, and let yourself just be a human person. And to be honest, having to say that to myself out loud seems obvious, but it's new to me. It's new to be able to say it's okay to just be. You don't have to have your cape on 24/7.
Leave yourself a Post-it on your bathroom mirror.
I have several in my house right now. Yep.
Right.
I have some in my kitchen that says, sit down. I have one in my living room that says, it's okay to sit still. I mean, these things that in my psyche, if you're sitting still, you're wasting time. If you're wasting time, you're not productive. If you're not productive, why are you even, like, why be? And so, again, like you've mentioned and started this off with, these are things that were put in my psyche before I chose to put them there. I didn't choose that. Someone put them there for me on my behalf, whether it's by words, by actions, or both.
Right. And then you're brainwashed to thinking that that's the only way to be.
That's it. Those are your choices. That's how you live.
And I used to look at people very judgmentally and critically, you know, like, what are you doing? There's no value in that. You're wasting your time.
What are you even,
Are you kidding? I used to look at people who played video games just for fun. Like, what the hell are you doing with your time?
Yes.
And for Hanukkah this past year, my husband bought me a Nintendo Switch.
Nice. Yeah.
With the game Animal Crossing in it. And he said, I think you're going to love this. Just play and don't judge yourself.
Yes.
And so that's one of my doing it just because it's fun activities. And I don't care that it's a game meant for kids. It's great. So zen. I have the little tiny little avatar of Marcy with purple hair. And she wears these cute little clothes and she waters the flowers and she goes fishing.
I love it.
And it's just calm. And there's no competition.
Right.
There's no, like, you have to do this first. It's, you know,
there's no wrong way to do it.
Right. And I love it.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's that's wonderful to have that too, because I think too, what, like you said, I mean, I was the same perspective of like, what are these people? You're just wasting away your life.
Right.
And then I got to like 33 and was like, all I've done is work. I have a great resume. That's wonderful. I have a lot of skills. Super. I have my master's. Great. But then what? So now I'm being able to say, okay, you've done the things. Give yourself a chance to just, like you said, be a human being, not a human doing.
Right.
And now, I mean, that's going to be I'm going to write that everywhere, by the way, because that's, I mean, that hits me on a level that like I didn't even.
That's also a Dr. Shefali thing from her book.
I mean, that's just perfect.
Yeah. She's freaking brilliant.
Yeah. I'm going to have to learn more about her.
Yeah. All you listeners, we were talking before we started the podcast, which I actually kind of forgot we were doing a podcast for a while because we've been enjoying this conversation so long. So
same.
I totally forgot we were recording this.
There's gonna be a lot of editing to do.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I don't think I can edit anything out. Maybe we do this. I break it apart into a 2-part.
Yeah, part 2.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But Dr. Shefali wrote a book about conscious parenting that is like the cornerstone of the parenting industry.
Right.
And she also just recently wrote a book called Radical Awakening, which has completely turned my own self-awareness and my own understanding of my parents and their generational trauma and my own parenting. It turned everything that I understand just a little bit on its ear in a much more grounded, clear,
like just
logical
enough to get it.
Way.
Awesome.
It just like snapped the pieces so that they fit.
Yeah.
You know? And she's just freaking brilliant. Anyway, so I start these podcast conversations with the 6 quick questions, and we just dove right in and totally forgot about them. So we're going to end with the 6 quick questions.
Great. Okay.
Okay. So what 6 words would you use to describe yourself?
Motivated, a leader. Well, I know that's not a descriptive
That works.
word.
That's fine. Nouns, verbs, adjectives. I don't care.
Empath.
Good.
Teamwork, team building, I guess. To be honest, lately, tired would be the word that I'm going to use.
Newborn. That makes sense.
Yeah. And curious.
Excellent. I love that combination. Nice. Number 2, what's your favorite way to spend a day?
Lately, it's been with my 6-month-old and my dogs, sitting outside in my yard, throwing the ball for my dogs while my son plays in the grass and learns about the world around us.
Nice.
Yeah.
Simple, beautiful, joyous.
Easy. Yes.
Excellent. What's your favorite childhood memory?
I used to play softball very competitively. I was on a lot of really competitive pre-Olympic squads. And I would say probably going to tournaments where I felt like my team and I were one. We had a great time with each other when we weren't playing, and when we were playing, we were phenomenal. And I have a lot of great moments. My dad was my coach. I just spent a lot of great time with him. And I just felt like those moments were moments where I really realized how strong I was and how much I loved being a leader and being a team player and being a learner, just all together.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Those were good times.
You're so impressive. Number 4, what is your favorite meal?
Macaroni and cheese.
Really? That was quick.
Anything with macaroni and cheese, any kind of macaroni and cheese. The funniest thing is when they get too fancy, I can't do it anymore. I like a good, simple, probably because I was often ate like the old school Kraft mac and cheese.
Sure.
So I like it, it reminds me of childhood. It reminds me of,
it's comforting.
Right, before your feet could touch the ground on the chair. Those are the moments I loved.
Yeah, I love mac and cheese also. And I have this issue with dairy now that I'm in my 50s. And so I found at Whole Foods in the same kind of easy package as the Kraft macaroni and cheese, but a non-dairy vegan version that tastes exactly the same. Oh. I don't even want to know what the cheese is.
Right.
I don't
care.
Who cares?
It's a great find.
Delicious.
Enjoy it.
Yep. Yeah. I might have that for lunch now that I'm talking about
it. I love it.
All right. Number 5. What's one piece of advice you would like to give your younger self?
Slow down. For sure.
Yeah.
I was chasing something that I'm not sure was ever really obtainable until I let myself slow down. And so I would love to tell myself to just slow down, take it easy, look around yourself, and just exist. And that was and is sufficient.
Yeah, it's not a race.
Yep. Yep.
Beautiful. What is the one thing you would most like to change about the world? It's not an easy question.
I want the world to be able to sit outside of their own selves and see each other and the world that others are living. I want us to be able to sit and say, not I get it, but I'm sorry that this is happening to you. I hear your challenge. I want to understand it. I might not, but I acknowledge that it's real for you. I acknowledge that it's hard for you. And I will be your ally in getting to a point where it's easier. I want us all to be able to get out of our own way and just go back to what we were supposed to be, which were just beings who were there to and for each other.
Right.
Instead of against each other, instead of fighting each other, instead of judging each other, often for things that are out of one's control. To be able to just say, you know what? I get that. I see you, and I respect who you are, where you're going, and where you came from.
Beautiful. Just absolutely. I think that's what we all need. We need more of that.
Yeah.
In our lives.
I would say so.
I think that's the perfect place to end.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Emily. This
Thank
was
you.
amazingly fabulous.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Excellent.
I can't wait to listen to it.
It'll be great.
It will be. Thank you so much, Marcy, for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, enjoy your mac and cheese. I might make my own. I have a box that I hid from myself for these kinds of days.
There you go. Excellent.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
You as well.
Bye.